And I call Senator Culleton.
Mr President, I stand here in this chamber today to present my inaugural speech on oath to deliver my message to the Australian people. What follows will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth before Almighty God and the people of Australia. Senators, veterans, Indigenous elders of this great land, and to all Australians, Pauline quoted, "I'm back." My quote is, "I'm here." Despite all attempts to silence the WA voters' choice, I am here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, despite all attempts to deflate my tyres on the drive over from Western Australia. And as one would know a good farmer, he knows he always keeps a good puncher kit handy in the ashtray of the ute and a good toolbox on the back. It's true, it can be hard to pull up a cocky. Mr President, just reiterating a few housekeeping rules, it appears certain members during other speeches are leaving the field before the final siren goes. So if any senator wants to leave, now is as a good time as any. I pay tribute to my party leader, Pauline Hanson, the PH in the One Nation. A good PH balance will grow a healthy Australia, and this hung parliament promises to do exactly that. Being a national voter for 35 years, I am honoured as a One Nation senator representing my constituents in Western Australia. With the support of my fellow senators Malcolm Roberts, Brian Burson and again Pauline Hanson, One Nation is the awesome foursome will be your voice in the Senate. We will work with other crossbench senators and both sides of the chamber to ensure Australia is heard and effectively represented. Must I say, on my first day of Parliament, I witnessed members singing out the same hymn book in St Andrew's Cathedral in Canberra. This now needs to be mirrored in both chambers in the Australian Parliament. As a farmer, it is true. The only audience I have ever had to address up until now has simply been a mob of sheep in the yards. If I sound a little bit rough, rest assured I will apply a little bit of choke until I get up to running temperature. I want my actions in this place to reflect my own personal experiences, and having been locked into a financial crocodile role for the last 6 years with people trying to steal my intellectual property, I have lost all incentive to invent anything ever again. But I haven't lost my incentive to fix the mess so it doesn't happen to others in the future. Prime Minister Turnbull says Australia needs to become more innovative. I'd say innovation raises a flag to attract large corporations to attack the innovator of a great idea. So let's fix that first. My inaugural question to the Senate on the 12th of September of this year was to the Honourable Attorney-General and concerned the inconsistencies and the unconstitutional behaviour of our courts. I have started in this place, as I mean to go on, with my inaugural question aiming right at the middle stump on constitutional issues. That question was unprecedented and referred to the High Court Rules Review Committee. It is on notice that Dennis Lilly wasn't the only best bowler to ever come out of Western Australia. Mr President, the hunted has now become the hunter. Australia is not running on all cylinders, and it is desperately in need of a tune-up. To simply put the blue flame out and just simply put it into overdrive. This will be done with the support of my team in Western Australia and those of my colleagues who are prepared to put the best interest of this country first. During tough times, my family always stood firmly by me and reminded me fail means first attempt in learning. One man's fortune is often out of another man's misfortune, and I have experienced highs and lows in business, but Australians are fighters, and the attitude that has built this nation is to never, ever give up. The reality of Australians today, however, is that the fight is not being carried out on a level playing field. It isn't fair, and the battle is too often against our own governments and those who purport to uphold the laws. For too long in this place, successive governments have defied the Constitution our nation was founded on, and in doing so have ignored their duty of care to the people of Australia. Australians are defenders and upholders of the Constitution and our laws, not a global government pushing UN dictates where undermine our sovereignty. It is long past time for an Oz exit from the UN and removal of all its shackles. Agenda 21 demands such a deregulation or removing the laws that have provided ethical guidance for foreign corporations in this country, adopting the attitude that they can do, seeing this in our banking institutions. We live in your world, in dealing with their clients, as recent inquiries have exposed and is still being ignored by this government. The reasons why the Australian people want a Royal Commission is the very reason why the banks don't. It should not be about going to our government and simply asking for a Royal Commission. It should be the people's right to demand one. A parliament is not acting in the best interest of the Australian people if it doesn't listen. A Royal Commission or a reconstituted grand jury is inevitable, and it will happen. Justice demands it. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Background. I am a fourth-generation farmer from the upper Great Southern region of Western Australia. I attended both primary and secondary schools in Narrogin. While I may have got up to a little bit of mischief as a child, I always defended others against bullies and stood up for what I believed was right. I defended my principles. At the time I started my career in the wool industry, Australia was riding on the sheep's back. The wool industry was large, prosperous and well regulated, protecting both the industry and its consumers against poor quality products and exploitation of its farmers and communities. I ventured into that industry, trading on futures and buying the Australian wool clip. In 1981, I started working at my father's business in Narrogin and surrounding districts, where I was one of 21 employees in his 35-year-old wool buying business. Yet through privatisation, that the level of competition was removed. In fact, it had become extinct. Growers now carry the risk and are considered captive to current markets. The term privatisation itself is just a con. The reality is that foreign corporations are the beneficiaries of our tax law and our lack of regulatory structures. My father's business was on fire until January 1991. The Australian government announced the suspension and later abandonment of the wool reserve price. The Primary Industry Minister back then, John Kerrin, on February 11, 1991, made an announcement which would change the wool industry forever. After being suspended for almost 6 months, the price fell from 870 cents a kilo clean to 700 cents a kilo. The wool industry had stalled until, through government intervention, it fell further from 700 cents a kilo to open market price to 430 cents a kilogram clean. In other words, another commodity stabilisation scheme had failed, leaving the Australian industry with a stockpile of 4.6 million bales of wool and close to 1 year's normal production of debt of $2.7 billion. A national disaster was the result. It was the biggest economic collapse in this nation's history, and like the recent beef and dairy industry disasters, it was also created by inappropriate government policy. This period still haunts me today because, like others in the industry, my father's business was dealt with a lethal blow. The government then took considerable time to reset the button, which started the demise of a magnificent Australian industry, and private buying would never perform to that standard again. Government intervention further caused the collapse of the price and also destroyed livelihoods of producers, traders and decimated rural communities. Our stock was worthless. Although growers were granted a supplemental scheme and did not feel the immediate impact at the time, however, my father's business did not qualify for such compensation, and as a result, national wool industry finished overnight. The government wasn't finished with the industry, however, and ordered 20 million sheep to be culled. The sheep were gassed and shot en masse as a result. I remember going to a farm to look at a clip I purchased in Culleton, one that I purchased on the back, and I thought the main power had failed. As the grower had the generator going, I found that petrol motor running was using an improvised gassing plant. The farmers were running sheep into the back of semi-tippers, rolling the tarps over the top and shutting back tailgates and gassing the young sheep to death, under instructions from then the government. I vomited over the fence. As a lot of the sheep appeared to be still clinging on to life, I saw numerous stray sheep in bush reserves and many pits dug around the region to dispose of such sheep carcasses. These memories still haunt me today, and I can still recall the smell of fox toxin in the air. Like then, a national disaster was caused by implementing poor political decisions made in ignorance, without appropriate research, and by politicians who simply refused to go out to the coalface and to learn the consequences of their actions or to rectify the initial errors. When it was clear the government possibly had failed, where was Plan B? These ongoing systemic policies failure by governments have accelerated the degradation of rural families and communities, including beef, dairy and sugar, that have seen the decline of rural communities across Australia. Rural Australia runs on passion and commitment. Agriculture runs on hope and faith and builds a true blue Australian character that has built this nation. The character may soon become extinct. Had the Nationals and other major parties been doing their jobs for farming families today and their communities through proper representation, our farming industries would still be vibrant. The sad reality too is that too many rural families feel shunned by their own communities, ashamed to speak out of the unconscionable treatment by the banks, lawyers, receivers, auctioneers and their agents. They feel there is nowhere to turn and then find that the very politicians who have enacted the inept policy decision that caused the collapse of their business are just as quick to refuse help for the farming families and continuously accept large donation from foreign banking corporations entrenched in this travesty of justice. The Nationals believe that farmers need access to more debt, another band-aid solution. This could not be further from the truth. Farmers do not need more debt. What they do need is a rural bank that will work with them without making adjustments to property values based on 1 year's weather events or knee-jerk decisions of government. Farmers' biggest risk, once focused on hopes of getting plenty of rain, would produce plenty of grain. Now our farmers are paid a price that has no bearing on the cost of production, quality controls or even the retail market price. With foreign corporate retailers dictating market prices as well as farm gate prices, our farming families are denied any market control or voice. Every year they are locked into a system that extracts more and more from them and does the same at the consumer end of the market. Pre-deregulation, Australia has lowest gross. Before pre-deregulation, Australia had lowest grocery prices in the developed world and a quality second to none. Post-deregulation, however, Australian consumers now pay the highest grocery prices in the developed world, with much of the food on offer imported and devoid of the quality and safety controls that our own farmers meet on their world-class products. The foreign corporate middlemen extract higher and higher profits at the expense of both farmers and Australian consumers. That must end. Australian farming families and consumers deserve the benefit of their nation's own quality produce. While the ANZ Bank, as agents to the rural program, proceeded to destroy farmers across the country, I contacted Terry Redmond, the leader of the National Party and Minister for Lands and the single shareholder. Terry Redmond and his National Party colleagues in West Australia turned their backs not only on me but on all farmers and did absolutely nothing, allowing properties like Yakimanga and my farm to be stolen by the ANZ Bank, aided by a corrupt court system. ANZ Bank and their lawyers sold the Webb Smith property to Bura Energy, a large fracking company. They later ignored further written advice and approved the sale of the Chinese, despite the properties have been taken without court orders. The fracking site is only 44 kilometres from freshwater reservoir near Roebuck Bay, which is located near Broome in Western Australia. How can any responsible government consider that acceptable environmentally, socially or economically? The reason that the foreign investors want to buy our land is the very reason why we should not be selling it. It is clear that our governments through the UN are supporting a world government that will strip sovereignty, ensure international, not national, ownership by farms, by transnational agribusiness corporations, branded TNCs, and global investors partnerships. This will result in more import for local consumptions throughout our domestic markets and further destruction of our primary industry and the national economy. We as Australians must remember the sacrifices of our current past diggers, sacrifices made for all Australian and all for that this nation represents and values. Before we take the word of a major political party who received large donations across the board from the big end of town, the foreign banks, duopoly, retailers and others, and then just accept their decision, we must be mindful of the consequences of their treacherous betrayal of our freedoms, our heritage and our constitutional rights. We too owe a debt of gratitude to those who have gone before. We too have sacrifices we must make to guard and uphold the freedoms passed from generations long gone. When the government committed Australia to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the G20, despite vehement opposition across the country, did they ever discuss the terms and conditions with the Australian people? Did the government take the proposal to a referendum as demanded under the Constitution? No, they did not. It appears that all major parties live in hope that the Australian people will abandon their present democracy and their constitution and let today's politician formulate a new constitution based on the very impost that they already forced on the people of this nation, in breach of our constitutional rights, and all done without the consent of the Australian people through a referendum. When I attended Senate school recently, I was handed a Senate pack which contained a pocket edition of the Australian Constitution with the overviews and notes by the Australian Government Solicitor. Due to certain disgruntled malcontents trying to remove me from the parliamentary poker table through section 44(2) of the Constitution and challenge my validity to stand here today as a senator in section 9 under disqualification, I began to read out and appreciate just what a powerful document our Constitution really is. It is the foundation document of our nation and clearly constitutes the Commonwealth of Australia. In this document lies the protection and rules that govern our rights and freedom. Before 1901, Australia was not a nation. From convention, the Constitution was drafted and was then put to a vote by the people of the colonies in referendums. On reflection, I was faced with the obvious question, why aren't we teaching our children the Australian Constitution in our schools? By doing so, our children would know their rights and understand and defend the Constitution that underpins our laws and freedoms. How would Australians know what is being taken from them if they were never taught about this great gift that they have? As raised in my inaugural question in this chamber, our courts have sidestepped their responsibilities under the Constitution and are currently acting in defiance of the foundation rule of this nation, the Constitution. I stand humbled and honoured to have been elected to this place and make a commitment that I will continue to defend and uphold the Australian Constitution as an elected senator, a one-nation senator and part of a team that is destined to grow. As the people of Australia come to understand just what successive governments have traded away and then stand with us to reclaim it back. This nation stands at a minute to midnight, and our obligation to future generations is no less than those who have gone before us and were prepared to do for us. When my wife Anne and I purchased a farm to raise our children in Williams, we wanted them to learn respect and experience the chores required when living on the farm. If our children were disrespectful, they had to pack their own survival kit and go camp outside the front gate of the farm to reflect on their behaviour. It wouldn't take them long to walk back down that long driveway and say, "Dad, I'll mend my ways." Other than respect, what they learn to appreciate is the grassroots is what reflects the best qualities of life. Instead of discouraging or disparaging the inventiveness and enthusiasm of our youth, our government should be men and women of vision and inspiration. Leaders who can set a standard that provides the model to our youth, which this country and its people deserve, our very best effort, our future generation deserve no less. Australia has been blessed with natural resources and attributes that remain the envy of the world. Our government need to stop telling and start listening and learning from the mistakes they have already made. Many today are oblivious to the threats that pose this nation. In 2003, I invented a revolutionary concept that saw me become an industry leader and also a major threat. It attracted attention around the world and dominated domestic markets. The patent was known as and trademarked as grain keg. This concept allowed my wife and I to set up a fully integrated farming, manufacturing and logistics company to take our homegrown products by direct conduit to end-user markets, in simple terms, paddock to plate. Grain keg was a leader in the OH&S risk and enabled bulk product to be introduced into existing feed room and would save thousands of tonnes of landfill. End-user markets would develop further domestically and are right round the world. In 2009, both Landmark and PCL, my financier, and Mitavite competed for the exclusivity of the grain keg concept. I went with Mitavite and joined forces with General Manager Graham Dillon and National Sales Manager Colin Price, but the venture failed due to inconsistent products which caused major palatability concerns despite multiple warnings. Mitavite clearly pigeonholed the concept through exclusivity and encouraged patent trolls through Mitavite agents Dean Nolzer, Peter Walsh and Jack Vivers to infringe all copyrights to my invention. I will reiterate, I have now become the hunter. I went back to the manufacturing of our products through a new site developed in Guyra, New South Wales, and continued on with servicing rights on the grain keg system. During this time, we were unaware that the Australian Wheat Board was self-destructing due to its involvement in the oil for food scandal and was facing litigation of $1.8 billion from international grower groups. They had about as much chance as flying as a grand piano out of a 10-storey building. It was during this period of March 2009 where we purchased another farm and, like others, were unaware that the AWB could not carry out funding past 6 months. Yet many farmers were given an interest-only loan at the time for 22 years. Roland Andrew Davis, better known as the toe cutter at ANZ, stated that only way growers could get a payout figure was to sign a new ANZ Bank letter of offer, a formality of switching from green to blue, and all terms and conditions would remain unchanged until your next review. The majority of farmers just simply signed over to the ANZ Bank, and before the ink was dry, they were forced to pay up sums of up to $6 million within weeks. Mr. President, I wish to put you on notice that farmers don't have a general mortgage. They have a joint venture, meaning at best a lender will only lend you 50 to 60%. So the other 40% is the farmer's skin in the game. That's his equity. Roland Andrew Davis also forced farmers to increase their personal injury and their death cover. When ANZ approached me to sign over to the ANZ, they wanted all fixed and floating charges over the intellectual property, which was a new condition to the loan. I was the only farmer, as I did not sign. It was clear that both the ANZ Bank and Rabobank were the main external funders and all hedge providers that provided the money for the rural program, and Landmark simply sat there as a Trojan horse. The ANZ Bank took it upon themselves to create new bank accounts that were foreign to my company and upon completion immediately defaulted my companies. This literally blew the tail feathers clean out of the backside of not only my own companies but many farmers around the country, and we had to flap like hell to keep elevated. However, some hit the deck. In attempts to avoid the ANZ Bank taking down farmers, we literally stood up and took them head on. The downside of the ANZ action had clearly put blood in the water, which invited other companies to also attack and go after my intellectual property of the Australian Keg Company. The company was forced to fend off a patent action where the quote from the lawyers exceeded $914,000. I was forced to go to the UK to sell the licence in Britain through Dodson and Horrell. Although they wanted it, it was hindered because as an inventor I could not give a guarantee and an outcome under the patent challenge. That was currently before the courts, one of the companies that held it. Hence, we had to fund this attack ourselves. And guess what? We won. Upon my return, we were to appear before a registrar in the Supreme Court of Western Australia. We did not understand the ANZ had become the introduced virus infecting our business. It had taken over by stealth, along with many other farmers. PCL, my true lender, then on the 28th of May 2013, a date infamy for this nation's court, my wife and I appeared in the West Australian Supreme Court before Registrar Whitbread, who denied us both the right to speak and awarded our farm, along with our life's work and assets, to be handed to Permanent Custodians Limited. Landbuck as well. Registrar Whitbread could have simply said, "Mr and Mrs Culleton, this action is about you losing both your family farms and businesses, so I will grant you a short adjournment for you to go down to the registry and fill out a Form 6 to enable you to enter an appearance." Registrar Whitbread chose not to clarify our situation to us, despite her being aware that both my wife and I were clearly inexperienced in court and court deficit. I learned that day that the real law is called common sense law. Under that rule, you only have 3 days to appeal. This Rule 62, Rule 4A, is a guillotine order which the West Australian Supreme Court proudly does not allow to have it set aside. On that day, the West Australian Supreme Court had proudly shut its doors on my wife and I and my children's inheritance. Through these actions of our state courts, I have come across people with severe mental and physical health issues. This includes people who have attempted self-harm and suicide. I have witnessed this on the front line around Australia at a meeting at Winton in Queensland with Bob Catter and Alan Jones, and I gained an understanding of how many victims the ANZ Bank had claimed Australia-wide. The disturbing reality was that this was grossly wrong, and I was determined to stand up and fight, protecting not only my own interests but also many others who did not feel they had the strength or knowledge to fight. I grounded my fleet, including my logistics company and the East Coast Milling Enterprise. I heard a very good analogy yesterday, a Monty Python analogy, come out of the chamber. I'd like to apply my Monty Python analogy from the chamber today, and that is, it's only a flesh wound. Come on, I'll fight you, you bastards, and fight we have. Since Winton, we have been able to keep many farmers on their properties, to keep producing and providing wealth for our economy. We have also been able to withstand the full assault of receivers, openly threatening farm owners, supported by multiple armed police officers and SWAT teams who held us at gunpoint as they came to the properties to evict us as farmers. These illegal actions, just got to use a bit of choke here, guys, running a bit rich, exposed nationally on the 60 Minutes program in April 2015, those same police officers have alleged that the receiver's car was stolen, even though they had the key and were filmed locking the vehicle before they left. At my property in Gyra, while protecting my assets and myself from attack by a cranky tow truck driver, a single tow truck key valued at what I valued it at, $7.50, was deemed stolen as a result in further court and is resulting in further court action. But however, the truth will come out. And a warning, what I have to say next may be a little bit distressing. If I had a choice of being publicly disgraced by the media or removing a loaded gun away from a boy's hand, I'd choose the first option again and again. I'd rather be humiliated than risk losing another life. I can deal with that. He shouldn't have to. During this experience, I have witnessed cases where receivers have violated farmers' wives, children's mothers, signatures forged. As a result, growers have in excess of $15 million worth of cattle removed from the property, and not 1 cent has gone off their debt to the bank, and yet they are still paying the loans. They have been stolen by the bank's agents. One had the audacity to send the freight bill back to the farmer. It is this arrogance that is pushing people over the edge. And I've also spoken to a number of people wanting to take their own lives. A grower watching this speech up here right now in the public gallery tried to end it all by tipping 20 litres of petrol on himself and walked into an open fire. He was in a coma for 6 months, all because of the ANZ Bank. And what about Jimmy Whalen's son, who shot himself with a 222 on his first year home on the farm? Rural Bank. This must end. And they had to leave their son on a driveway of a farm for 2 days with a sheet over him until the coroner got there. These growers were never a distressed asset and had perfect farming operations as well as I did. But the government came in and shut down their live cattle trade and left them easy prey for the banks, just the same way they did it to the wool industry in the 90s. During the last week banking inquiry held by Mr Turnbull, which we all call the banker's belly scratch, I was sent a note from a lady who was fighting with Rabobank. It was a suicide letter because after watching the news on the pathetic inquiry, she had given up all hope. So while the bankers were saying sorry, I say sorry doesn't cut it. Bank advertising needs to have warning signs like cigarette packets. If you take out this loan, be warned if you could have health implications or cause death. Despite all multiple warnings in my case, all company assets which had no relationship with the land were taken by my purported buyers, Graham Arthur Harding and Matthew and Jesse Ford, were all put on notice that the properties to be bought by them were not for sale. They were also put on notice that the farms contained assets of other companies that had no relationship with ANZ Bank or PCL. Despite these multiple warnings, they pushed ahead conferring with ANZ Bank and continued to proceed with the purchase. The ANZ Bank sold the properties walk in, walk out on instructions from VNW Real Estate, Stephen Vaughan and Hugh Ness. They sold a magnificent asset for 1/10 of the price, including 2,000 tonne of grain stock worth well over $1.2 million, so they got it for nothing, and all the family furniture and belongings, which included our kids' children's sport medallions. The ANZ Bank had acted unlawfully not only on us, but to a large number of growers around the country. We have yet to have our clearing sale. It was said that over 4,000 farmers had been sent to the wall by the ANZ Bank. It was the biggest asset for Asia grab in this nation's history. ANZ Bank and other major banks, including Rabo, have clearly performed financial terrorism on the people of this country, and they will be held to account. A Royal Commission or a grand jury will happen. I appeared on the 60 Minutes show to show Australia what was happening to our farmers around Australia. The old saying is, a picture speaks 1,000 words. This can be viewed on my website, my Facebook page, and I urge all Australians to go and revisit it, called Farmers Fighting Back. You see that the ANZ Bank receiver's agent were clearly caught on camera in the kitchen of Bruce Dixon's farm, saying, "We're not here to head bash you. We can get the tactical response group to remove you farmers." My son, my proud son, filmed that exchange and saved not only Bruce's farm, but many farms and small businesses around Australia. We also saved his life. Yes, it is true that over 40 police officers attended the Dixon's farm. We were told ANZ Bank is now in possession. you have only days to remove your items and equipment. Well, who can do that in a farming operation? As a result, this clearly did not happen. That day reverberated a message to the banking industry right around Australia, and there have been many beneficiaries from the actions that we did in that program. Our farmers have been given their properties back. What bank goes around and spends shareholders' money repaying all their bills, paying out their local accounts and giving their properties back and saying, gee, I made a mistake? The police locked the receiver's car and left the keys, which was all recorded on national TV that day. I have since been personally charged with stealing a motor car that the receivers left behind at Bruce Dixon's that day. 22 police officers have been called before the West Australian Magistrate Court to give evidence against me. I still scratch my head and wonder how I got past so many cops that day. It's only just actually dawned on me how talented I must be. We need to keep things simple, respect others and activate our personal powers and tell the courts to smarten up. Family courts whereby the legal vultures are feasting on the carcass of the marriage vows are treating as a joke, and this court, senators, needs to be reviewed now. We say don't drink and drive because every life is worth saving, yet our family courts are driving 27 young healthy Australians every week to suicide. It is the solicitors' fees and the potential trauma that is the very reason why they do not want marriage reconciliation. Senators, I'm about to wind up. You are now being made aware of this as the custodians of the people. In fact, they may have very well voted for you. They, through their vote, entrusted you to act in their best interest. Well, I, along with One Nation, wanted a moratorium to be placed immediately on the Fam Court and not another life be lost. Senators, you are here for the Australian people, not for the corporation. Many ask, we have a constitution, what's that about? These questions are feedback from a large sample of Australian population, and I was one of them until Senate school. The penny dropped. We all need to be aware of what we have, because if we don't, we would never know if someone was stealing it or taking it off us. This puts in doubt whether the shaping of Australia is the best interest of the Australian population. An ignorant population is one that is easily manipulated by the use of lies, by omission, and with false statements and promises. Trust in our country has eroded. Life doesn't have to be this tough for the Australian people. Like farming, you only get a small window of opportunity. My vision for Australia is to give Australians a future. This can be done very simply by having governments and laws adhering to the Constitution. From the Constitution, the people's gift can invoke or revoke, incorrect and reform and re-establish. We can raise capital back through our primary industry, and by doing so will spawn opportunities to rehabilitate manufacturing back on our shores.
Senator Culleton,
I'm nearly there.
Well,
I'm nearly there, trust me.
there. Yes.
Other nations are envious of what we have. It's clearly God's land. I'd like to see governments back banks, a reintroduction of co-ops and build a society that values and cares for the most vulnerable. To conclude, if the judges don't respect law, how can they establish law and order? If the Constitution is the Grand Express motorway, why would you take the road full of potholes and roadworks, yet this is what our lawyers are doing? Does no one care? People's hard-earned life assets are being just stripped, and the courts are the ones that drag out cases for years and make people homeless. I can say from my own experience, you wouldn't want to break down in the desert with only one water bottle with a lawyer. I stand in this chamber with respect for all those who share this responsibility and privilege as senators, and I do respect you all, senators. I challenge each and every one of remember Section 51 of the Constitution states that the Parliament exists to make laws for peace and order and good government. I put Australia and this chamber on notice. It is time those elected to the Senate did exactly that. There is an answer and a simple fix. Bring back the Constitution and bring back our real laws. To end, I want to say thank you to my biggest supporters, my incredible wife, just a bit more choke here, guys, Anna, my sons who have been galvanised heroes, James and William, and my beautiful daughter, Abby. Without your support, I would not be standing here today. I said I would go in and fight for us and others as long as I didn't lose respect of my children, and you have supported me right through. You are all my heroes, and I wouldn't be a man I am today if it wasn't for the love that you've shown towards me. I am a proud father, brother, husband and son to Rodden and Leslie, who I love you dearly, who are watching me now, and I'm very proud of. And for all the farmers, I said I'd come here when I made it and simply say, and may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save these bankers. Thank you.